On the dusty edge of the Arizona Territory, 1885, Thomas Blackhawk stands before a weathered cabin, his only inheritance from a distant uncle. The Apache man's calloused hands touch splintered wood as townsfolk snicker behind his back. Worthless, they whisper. Inside, his 8-year-old daughter, Sarah, explores while Thomas contemplates another season of struggle. When a floorboard creaks differently under her small feet, Sarah's curiosity leads her to pry it loose. Her eyes widen at what lies beneath, a hidden trapdoor covered in strange symbols. What Sarah discovers below will change everything. Gold coins, jewels, and artifacts worth more than anyone in the territory has ever seen. But who buried this fortune, and why has it remained hidden for so long? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Thomas Blackhawk's weathered hands traced the cabin's splintered doorframe as he stepped back outside. The Arizona Territory sun beat down mercilessly, much like life had done to him these past years. At 36, his face carried more lines than most men a decade older. He watched Sarah exploring the property, her curiosity undimmed despite their circumstances. "What do you think, little one?" he called. Sarah turned, her 8-year-old face brightening. "It needs lots of fixing, Papa, but it could be home." Thomas nodded, grateful for her resilience. 3 years since tuberculosis took Maria, and still Sarah found ways to hope. He pulled the deed from his pocket. His uncle's final gift. The man had been distant, appearing only twice in Thomas's life, but blood remained blood. Back in Copper Springs, they occupied a single room behind Miller's livery. Thomas worked wherever hands were needed, breaking horses, hauling cargo, tracking for the occasional hunting party, willing to hire an Apache guide. The pay was always less than offered to white men, but he swallowed his pride for Sarah's sake. "Papa, look," Sarah called, pointing to a pair of barn swallows nesting in the eaves. "They think it's a good home too." That evening, they sat on the cabin's porch steps, eating beans warmed over a small fire. The mountains turned purple with sunset, and stars emerged in the darkening sky. In these moments, Thomas felt Maria's absence most keenly. "Tell me about Mama again," Sarah requested, leaning against his arm. Thomas reached into his shirt pocket and withdrew the faded photograph. Their only family portrait, taken when Sarah was just 6 months old. Maria's smile radiated from the image, her Apache features striking alongside Thomas's more weathered face. "Your mother was like water in the desert," he began, his deep voice softening. "Rare and precious, and bringing life wherever she went. She could sing so beautifully that even the birds would stop to listen." Sarah nodded, having heard these words many times but never tiring of them. "And she was smart too, right, Papa? Smartest person I ever knew. Taught herself to read from discarded newspapers. Wanted you to have schooling so badly." His voice caught. "That's why we're little one. A fresh start." Thomas didn't mention the whispers that followed them in town. Indian squaw, they called Maria even after death. Half-breed, they said of Sarah when they thought he couldn't hear. In Copper Springs, the Blackhawks would always be outsiders. The next morning, Thomas rode into town for supplies, leaving Sarah with strict instructions to stay near the cabin. At Parker's general store, he endured the usual stares as he purchased nails, a hammer, and enough food for several days. "Heard you inherited old Joe's place," Parker said, counting Thomas's carefully saved coins. "Not much of a windfall, is it? That cabin's been rotting for 20 years. Thomas met the man's gaze evenly. "It's a roof and land of our own, more than we had yesterday." Outside the store, he encountered Sheriff Mills, a barrel-chested man whose badge seemed perpetually tarnished. Blackhawk, Mills acknowledged with a curt nod. "Settling in at the old place, are you? Best keep to yourself out there. Less trouble that way." The warning was clear enough. Thomas simply nodded and continued loading his supply. As he rode back, Thomas caught sight of Sarah sitting beneath a gnarled juniper tree near the cabin, reading her tattered schoolbook. The sight squeezed his heart. Maria would be proud of their daughter's determination. That night, after tucking Sarah into the bedroll on the cabin's cleanest corner, Thomas sat on the porch and pulled out Maria's photograph again. "I'm doing my best," he whispered to her image, "but it's hard without you." The stars offered no answer, but as a coyote called in the distance, Thomas felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. This broken-down cabin might not be much, but it was theirs. Tomorrow, he would begin repairs on the roof. Perhaps, just perhaps, they could make a real home here. As he tucked the precious photograph away, Thomas had no idea how dramatically their fortunes would change by the following sundown. Dawn broke with Thomas already on the cabin's roof, hammer in hand. 2 days of work had cleared the worst debris, but much remained before the place would be properly habitable. Below, Sarah swept the porch with a broom fashioned from desert brush. "Papa, look," she called, pointing skyward. A golden eagle soared overhead, its wingspan casting a fleeting shadow across the property. As they watched, a single feather drifted down, landing at Sarah's feet. She carefully picked it up, examining its perfect form. "Eagle medicine is powerful," Thomas said, climbing down. "My grandmother would say it's a sign of good fortune." Sarah tucked the feather into her hair. "Then I'll keep it close today." After a simple breakfast, Thomas continued his repairs while Sarah explored inside. The cabin's interior consisted of a main room with a stone fireplace, a small adjoining kitchen space, and a back room that would become their sleeping quarters. Dust covered everything, and mouse droppings dotted the corners. Sarah's task was to sweep the floor before Thomas could assess which boards needed replacing. She worked diligently, humming a tune her mother once sang. The eagle feather bobbed with each movement of her. Near the fireplace, her broom hit a floorboard that sounded different from the others, a hollow sound. Sarah paused, sweeping again deliberately. Yes, something was different. She knelt down, running small fingers along the board's edge. "It moves, Papa," she called out, excitement in her voice. Thomas entered, wiping sweat from his brow. "What moves, little one?" "This board. Listen." She tapped it, then tapped another for comparison. Thomas frowned, kneeling beside her. The board was indeed loose, and unlike its neighbors, had subtle tool marks along one edge. Someone had removed it before. "Stand back," he instructed, retrieving his knife to pry at the edge. The board lifted easily, revealing a dark space beneath. But what caught Thomas's eye was not just darkness, but the glint of metal. Using the knife, he loosened adjacent boards until a 2-foot square opening appeared. "Papa," Sarah whispered, eyes wide. Below them was not just the expected dirt and crossbeams, but a deep cavity. And atop what appeared to be a ladder leading downward was a small metal box. Thomas carefully extracted it. The box was made of iron, intricately worked with unfamiliar symbols. It took considerable strength to break its rusted lock. Inside lay a dozen gold coins, each larger than a silver dollar and gleaming as if minted yesterday. Spanish markings and the profile of a long-dead king adorned their faces. "Are we rich now?" Sarah asked, touching one coin with a tentative finger. "These are very old, very valuable," Thomas answered, his mind racing. "But we need to see what else is down there." The trapdoor was larger than the removed floorboards had suggested. Beneath was a ladder descending into darkness. Thomas lit a lantern and went first, instructing Sarah to remain above. "No, Papa, I found it," she insisted, "and I have the eagle feather for protection." The ladder led to a small chamber, perhaps 10 feet square, dug into the earth and reinforced with timber. The lantern light revealed what could only be described as a treasure trove: stacks of similar coins, small chests containing jewelry, silver items tarnished black with age, and artifacts Thomas recognized as both Spanish and native in origin. "Mother of God," he whispered, using Maria's Catholic expression. Sarah stepped off the ladder, her eyes wide. "Who put it here, Papa?" "Someone who never returned for it," Thomas replied, lifting a golden cross studded with colored stones. "This is Spanish work, over 100 years old." They spent an hour examining their find, Thomas growing increasingly concerned. Such wealth would bring danger if discovered. The territory had laws about treasure finds, but he harbored no illusions about an Apache man being treated fairly if powerful interests became involved. "Sarah," he said finally, "this must remain our secret for now. Do you understand?" She nodded solemnly, the eagle feather still in her hair. "Because people would try to take it from us." "Yes," Thomas sighed, hating to burden her with adult concerns. "While I figure out what to do, tell no one." That night, sleep eluded them both. Sarah kept the eagle feather beneath her pillow, whispering to it her dreams of a new dress for school and medicine for old Mary, the tribe's ailing elder. Thomas stared at the ceiling, calculations and fears churning in his mind. The treasure would change everything, but whether for better or worse remained to be seen. Thomas rose before dawn, his mind still wrestling with their discovery. While Sarah slept, he returned to the hidden chamber, lantern in hand, to examine the treasure more carefully. Among the Spanish gold he found something unexpected, a small leather pouch decorated with Apache symbols. Opening it revealed dried herbs now brittle with age, and several small stones considered sacred by his people. Thomas recognized the pouch as a medicine bundle similar to those his grandmother had crafted. What was it doing among Spanish treasure? Later, as they ate a breakfast of cornmeal mush, Thomas studied his daughter's face. "I must go to town today," he said carefully. "You'll stay with Mrs. Whitebird at the settlement." Sarah looked up sharply. "But Papa, no arguments, little one. I need to learn more about this cabin's history." After delivering Sarah to the elderly Apache woman who occasionally watched her, Thomas rode to Copper Springs. His first stop was the county records office, a dusty corner of the sheriff's building, where a bored clerk barely acknowledged him. "I need information about the cabin I inherited," Thomas explained. "Who owned it before my uncle?" The clerk sighed, retrieving a large ledger. "Your uncle Joseph Blackhawk acquired it in '77 from a prospector named Emmett Taylor. Taylor bought it in '62. He frowned. "Records before that are spotty. Territory wasn't properly organized yet." Thomas nodded, having expected as much. "What happened to Taylor?" "Disappeared in '77, right after selling to your uncle. Some said he found gold and headed to California. Others said he drank himself to death in Mexico." The clerk shrugged. Indians weren't the only ones who vanished in those days. Thomas's next stop was the Copper Springs Gazette, where ancient newspapers were kept in chronological stacks. The editor, a young man named Wilson, was surprisingly helpful, perhaps out of boredom. "Taylor, let me think," Wilson mused, flipping through bound volumes. "There was something here. April 1877. Local prospector Emmett Taylor sells holdings before departing territory. Claims ill health requires sea air." That's all it says. Thomas thanked him and headed toward Parker's store for supplies. Outside he encountered old Mary Cumming Feather, who had come to town for medicine. "The cabin speaks to you, doesn't it?" she asked without preamble, her clouded eyes seeming to look through him. Thomas tensed. "What do you know of it?" She smiled, revealing few remaining teeth. "I know treasure brings blood, always has." She touched his arm with gnarled fingers. "The Spanish gold was cursed from the beginning, stolen twice over." Before Thomas could question her further, she shuffled away, leaving him unsettled. How could she know? Was it merely an old woman's rambling, or something more? At the general store, Thomas purchased supplies while keeping his expression neutral. He needed to appear as though nothing had changed, just a poor Apache making modest improvements to a worthless inheritance. "Roofs fixed yet?" Parker asked, wrapping salt and coffee in paper. "Getting there," Thomas replied. "Previous owner let it go to ruin." Parker snorted. "Taylor was an odd one, kept to himself except when drinking." "Your uncle wasn't much different." Thomas carefully added, "I found some old things in the cabin. Any idea how long it's been there?" "Built during the Mexican War, I heard. Changed hands plenty." Parker leaned forward. "Some say Spanish soldiers used it once, long before my time." Thomas returned to find Sarah waiting impatiently at Mrs. Whitebird's dwelling. "Did you learn about our treasure?" she asked immediately. Thomas cautioned, glancing around. "Remember our secret." That evening, back at the cabin, Thomas showed Sarah the medicine pouch. "This belongs to our people," he explained. "It means the Spanish gold is mixed with Apache history." Sarah turned the pouch in her small hands. "Is it ours then? Truly ours?" Thomas sighed. "That's the question that keeps me awake. By law, treasure found on private land belongs to the landowner. That's us. But laws don't always protect people like us. Could we give some away," Sarah suggested, "to help the settlement? And maybe buy books for children who don't have any." Thomas smiled at his daughter's generous spirit. "First, we need to ensure our claim is secure. I'll speak with a lawyer in Junction City next week. Until then, we continue as if nothing has changed." Later, after Sarah slept, Thomas carefully removed several gold coins and the most portable jewelry pieces, wrapping them in oilcloth. These he would hide separately as insurance against trouble. His instincts told him their quiet life was about to become far more complicated. Outside, an owl called 3 times, a sign his grandmother would have interpreted as warning. Thomas placed the medicine pouch inside his shirt, close to his heart, wondering if its ancient power might offer some protection against whatever lay ahead. A week passed with Thomas working steadily on the cabin's repairs. To anyone watching, they were simply a poor Apache man and his daughter making the best of a meager inheritance. But beneath the floorboards, gold worth a fortune lay hidden, a secret that weighed increasingly heavy. Thomas was replacing rotted wood on the porch when he noticed the dust cloud. A horse and rider approached from the direction of town. He casually moved his rifle closer while continuing his work. The rider turned out to be Preston Wells, the banker, a man who had barely acknowledged Thomas's existence during their few previous encounters. "Mr. Blackhawk," Wells called, his tone surprisingly cordial. "Fine day for improvements." Thomas straightened, wiping his hands on his trousers. "Wells, what brings you out this way?" The banker dismounted, surveying the property with what appeared to be newfound interest. "Just checking on properties in the area. Land values might increase with the railroad spur coming next year." Thomas nodded noncommittally, wondering what had prompted this sudden visit. The banker had never shown interest in Apache property before. "I realize this place came to you somewhat unexpectedly," Wells continued. "If you're finding it a burden, the bank could make you a fair offer." "We're managing fine," Thomas replied. "Sarah likes it here." Wells nodded, a tight smile on his thin face. "Of course, just being neighborly. Should you change your mind?" After the banker departed, Thomas returned to the hidden chamber. The discovery had made him paranoid, seeing threats where perhaps none existed. Still, Wells' unexpected visit troubled him. Among the treasures, he found a gold pocket watch with Spanish inscriptions. Its face was cracked, but amazingly it still ticked when wound. Thomas checked the time against the sun's position. It kept perfect time despite its damaged appearance. The watch reminded Thomas that time was running short. The longer they kept their secret, the more likely it would be discovered. At dinner, Sarah chatted about school, where she'd returned after a brief absence, while they settled into the cabin. "Miss Thompson says I read better than any student she's taught," she announced proudly. "Your mother would be pleased," Thomas smiled. Sarah pushed her beans around her plate. "I told Lily about our old coins today." Thomas froze. "What did you tell her?" "Just that we found some old coins in the cabin," Sarah said quickly, sensing his alarm. "I didn't say how many or where exactly." "Sarah, we agreed. I'm sorry, Pup. She was showing me her doll and I wanted to have something special too." Thomas sighed. Children and secrets rarely mixed well. "What did Lily say?" "She didn't believe me. Said Indians don't have valuable things." The casual cruelty stung, though Thomas was somewhat relieved. Still, word could spread. Children talked, and adults listened. The following day, Thomas noticed 3 strangers in town, well-dressed men asking questions at the hotel. Nothing unusual about visitors in Copper Springs, but Thomas's instincts triggered warning bells. His suspicions grew when Sarah reported that her teacher had asked specifically about their cabin. She wanted to know if we found anything interesting while cleaning up, Sarah explained on their ride home. I remembered our secret and said no. Thomas squeezed her shoulder approvingly. That evening, a fine carriage stopped outside their cabin, unheard of on this remote track. A gentleman in an expensive suit stepped down, followed by two rough-looking men who remained by the vehicle. Mr. Blackhawk? The gentleman extended his hand. Garrett Sloan, I represent certain business interests in the territorial capital. Thomas nodded cautiously. I'll be direct, Sloan continued, his smile not reaching his eyes. I've been authorized to offer you $300 for this property. Immediate payment, no questions asked. The amount was 10 times what the cabin was worth on paper, but a fraction of what lay beneath it. Not interested in selling, Thomas stated flatly. Sloane's smile tightened. 500 then, more than generous for. He gestured dismissively. This is our home, Thomas replied. Not for sale at any price. The businessman studied Thomas with new intensity. I see. Well, should you reconsider? I'm staying at the hotel in town. He turned to leave, then added, beautiful country out here. Shame how accidents happen in such remote places. After they departed, Thomas checked the broken pocket watch, nearly 7 o'clock. He had decisions to make, and time was ticking away. That night, he moved half the gold coins to a new hiding place beneath the floorboards of the shed, working by moonlight while Sarah slept. The broken watch he kept in his pocket, its steady ticking a reminder that their peaceful days were numbered. The morning after Sloane's visit, Thomas rode into town alone, leaving Sarah with strict instructions to stay inside with the doors barred. His destination was the small territorial library housed in the back of the schoolhouse. The librarian, Miss Eleanor Winters, looked up in surprise as Thomas entered. Few in Copper Springs frequented the library, and certainly no Apache had ever crossed its threshold. May I help you? She asked, adjusting her spectacles. I need information about this area's history, Thomas explained. Specifically Spanish presence in the late 1700s. Eleanor's eyebrows rose with interest. An unusual request. May I ask why? Thomas had prepared his answer. Found some old markings while repairing my cabin. Looked Spanish to me. Well, you've come to the right place, she said, warming to the subject. The Spanish maintained several trade routes through this territory between 1760 and 1800. She led him to a shelf containing several slim volumes. These journals document expeditions through the region. And this, she pulled down a large map, yellowed with age, shows the main routes. Thomas studied the map carefully. His cabin sat near what had once been a junction of Spanish trails, one leading to Mexico, another toward California. Were there conflicts in this area? He asked. Between Spanish and Apache? Eleanor nodded. Numerous. The Apache raided Spanish convoys regularly. She hesitated, then added, no offense intended. None taken. My ancestors had reason to resist invaders. She smiled slightly. Indeed, there's a particular incident you might find interesting. She retrieved a leather-bound volume from a locked cabinet. The Vasquez expedition of a Spanish convoy disappeared completely. 50 soldiers, 3 wagons, and according to rumor, a significant amount of gold. Thomas's pulse quickened. What happened to them? No one knows for certain. The official Spanish report blamed Apache raiders, but she lowered her voice. The commander, Captain Diego Vasquez, was himself underwritten for financial irregularities. Some historians believe he may have orchestrated the convoy's disappearance. Thomas carefully turned the brittle pages, finding a crude map that included landmarks he recognized, including the ridge where his cabin now stood. Eleanor watched him with growing curiosity. Mr. Blackhawk, have you found something significant at your property? Their eyes met, and Thomas sensed an intelligence he could potentially trust. Still, caution prevailed. Just trying to understand the land's history, he replied. That evening, Thomas returned to the treasure chamber with renewed purpose. He methodically searched through items he'd previously overlooked, seeking anything that might confirm the connection to the Vasquez expedition. In a small wooden chest, beneath layers of coins, he found a leather-bound journal with the name Diego Vasquez inscribed on its cover. The journal was written in Spanish, which Thomas couldn't read, but the dates were clear. Entries spanning from Thomas brought the journal to the surface and examined it by lamplight. Though unable to understand the text, he recognized maps drawn inside showing the region, with his cabin's location marked by a cross. On one page, a list of figures followed by gold weights confirmed what he now suspected. This treasure was indeed from the missing Spanish convoy. The journal raised new questions. Had his uncle known about the treasure? Had the prospector Taylor found it first? Most importantly, who had legal claim to it now? The next morning, Thomas made a decision. He invited Eleanor to dinner at the cabin, ostensibly to thank her for her help. Sarah was delighted by the prospect of a guest and spent the afternoon sweeping and arranging wildflowers in a tin can. "Is she your sweetheart, Papa?" Sarah asked mischievously. Thomas smiled. "She's a potential ally, little one. Sometimes knowledge is as valuable as gold." Eleanor arrived promptly, bringing a loaf of fresh bread. Thomas had prepared a stew from a rabbit he'd trapped that morning. Sarah charmed their guest with her reading ability and questions about books. After the meal, when Sarah was occupied with a new book Eleanor had brought her, Thomas took a calculated risk. "I found something," he said quietly, "something that connects to what we discussed yesterday." Eleanor's eyes widened as he carefully unwrapped the journal. "This is remarkable," she whispered, gently turning the pages. "Where did you—" "Better you don't know exactly," Thomas interrupted. "Can you read Spanish?" She nodded. "My grandfather was from Spain. He taught me." She studied several pages intently. "Thomas, this is Captain Vasquez's personal journal. According to this entry," she pointed to a passage, "he diverted the convoy to avoid unnecessary taxation by the crown. He planned to retrieve the gold later, but was killed in Mexico City before he could return." Thomas absorbed this information. So the gold was stolen, twice over. As old Mary said, the legal implications are complex. Eleanor said thoughtfully, "But historically speaking, this journal is priceless." Thomas watched her carefully. "Can I trust you, Miss Winters?" She met his gaze steadily. "Yes, Mr. Blackhawk. I believe you can." Thomas woke with a start, hand automatically reaching for his hunting knife. Something had disturbed his sleep, a sound that didn't belong. He listened, eyes adjusting to the darkness. Beside him, Sarah slept peacefully. There it was again, a faint creak from the main room. Moving silently as only a lifetime hunter could, Thomas crept toward the sound. The cabin door stood slightly ajar. He was certain he'd barred it before retiring. Outside, moonlight revealed fresh boot prints that weren't his own. By dawn, Thomas had thoroughly searched the cabin and surroundings. Nothing appeared missing, but someone had definitely entered and searched the main room. They'd been careful, but Thomas noted subtle signs. A jar moved slightly, a floorboard not quite settled back into place, near, but not directly over the treasure chamber. Why would someone come in and not take anything? Sarah asked over breakfast, frightened by the intrusion. They were looking for something specific. Thomas replied, mind racing. The gold itself was well hidden, but he worried about the journal he'd shown Eleanor. Had he made a mistake trusting her? "We need to be extra careful now," he told Sarah. "No being alone, not even during the day." After escorting Sarah to school, Thomas made 2 stops in town. First, to Sheriff Mills, who barely looked up from his coffee. "Probably just a drifter looking for food," Mills said dismissively. "Nothing worth stealing in that old place anyway." Thomas bit back his anger. "Someone broke into my home while my daughter slept." The sheriff sighed. "Look, Blackhawk, I'll ride by when I can, but you're pretty far out. Might consider a dog." Good warning system. Thomas's second stop was the gunsmith. He emerged with a Colt revolver, ammunition and significantly lighter pockets. The weapon had cost nearly all his legitimate savings, but Sarah's safety was worth every cent. That afternoon, while Sarah played within sight, Thomas practiced with the revolver until his aim was sure. The weapon felt strange compared to his familiar rifle, but its advantage in close quarters was undeniable. That evening he carefully engraved Apache protection symbols into the wooden grip, his grandmother's designs that she claimed would guide a warrior's hand in battle. "Is that to shoot bad men?" Sarah asked, watching him work. Thomas chose his words carefully. "It's to protect us if needed." But a wise Apache uses words before weapons. Like when you told Mr. Sloan to go away? Yes. Though sometimes people don't listen to words, Thomas finished the last symbol, a lightning bolt representing swift justice. "Tomorrow I'll teach you to shoot the rifle." Sarah's eyes widened. "You're of Apache warrior blood," Thomas said solemnly, "and these are uncertain times." The following day brought Eleanor to their door, concern evident in her expression. "There are rumors in town," she said quietly after Sarah went to collect eggs from the wild chickens that had taken residence in the decrepit coop. "About Spanish gold and your cabin." Thomas's jaw tightened. "What kind of rumors?" "Garrett Sloan has been asking questions about the property's history, and I overheard Preston Wells telling someone that your land might contain unexpected value. Have you told anyone about what I showed you?" Eleanor's expression turned indignant. "Of course not. I would never betray your trust." Thomas studied her face and decided she spoke truth. "Forgive me, it's difficult to know who to trust." That evening, after practicing with the rifle, Sarah proving a surprisingly steady shot, Thomas spotted riders approaching. He recognized Sloan, accompanied by the same rough men from before. "Get inside," he told Sarah, the Colt now holstered at his hip. Sloan dismounted, his previous pretense at cordiality gone. "Mr. Blackhawk, my patience is wearing thin. My employer is very interested in this property, and prepared to take extraordinary measures to acquire it." "The law says this land is mine," Thomas replied evenly. Sloan smiled coldly. "Laws are interpreted by men, and men can be persuaded. $1,000 my final offer. Not for sale." One of Sloan's men stepped forward menacingly, but froze when Thomas's hand moved to the revolver. "Careful," Thomas warned. "I'm defending my home, which is my right under any law." Sloan assessed the situation, then nodded to his men. "We'll return, Mr. Blackhawk. Consider your position carefully. You're one man far from town, with a child to protect." After they departed, Sarah emerged from the cabin. "Are they gone for good, Papa?" Thomas watched the dust cloud receding toward town. "No, little one, but we'll be ready when they return." That night, Thomas set simple alarms around the property, twine strung with tin cans that would sound if disturbed. The engraved Colt he kept loaded beside him as he maintained vigil, the Apache symbols seeming to glow faintly in the moonlight. He was no longer just a poor man with an unexpected inheritance. He was a warrior, defending what was his by law, by right, and if necessary by force. 3 days passed without incident, though Thomas maintained constant vigilance. Each morning he checked his alarm systems, and each night he slept lightly, the Colt within reach. Sarah had taken to carrying her eagle feather everywhere, convinced of its protective powers. On the 4th day, Eleanor's buggy approached the cabin, accompanied by a man Thomas didn't recognize. He watched them through his rifle's sight until certain no one else followed. "Thomas," Eleanor called, waving to show peaceful intentions. "I've brought someone who might help." The stranger was tall and lean, with spectacles and a scholarly air. His clothes spoke of Eastern wealth, but his weathered face suggested considerable time outdoors. "Professor James Harrington," he introduced himself with a firm handshake. "Archaeologist from the Smithsonian Institution." Thomas's expression remained guarded. "What brings a Smithsonian professor to my door?" Eleanor interjected. James is an old friend of my family. He specializes in Spanish colonial history and Native American artifacts. I've told him nothing specific, but thought his expertise might be valuable. Thomas considered this development. A respected scholar could either legitimize his claim to the treasure or become yet another threat. Come inside, he decided finally. Sarah will be pleased to have visitors. Over coffee, Harrington spoke knowledgeably about the region's history, impressing Thomas with his respectful references to Apache culture. Sarah sat enraptured as the professor described ancient civilizations and their treasure. Miss Winters mentioned you found some Spanish artifacts, Harrington said eventually. I'd be most interested in seeing them purely academically, of course. Thomas exchanged glance with Eleanor, who nodded encouragingly. He excused himself and returned with a small object wrapped in cloth. Not the journal, but something else he'd selected carefully. I found this while repairing the cabin, Thomas explained, unveiling a gold ring shaped like a coiled serpent, ruby eyes glinting in the afternoon light. Harrington's breath caught. Extraordinary, he whispered, examining the ring without touching it. This is consistent with Spanish aristocratic jewelry from the late 18th century. May I? Thomas nodded, and the professor lifted the ring gently, studying its craftsmanship. The serpent was a common motif, representing both danger and wisdom. Harrington explained, this particular style, I've seen similar pieces in collections attributed to the Vasquez expedition. Thomas feigned surprise. Vasquez expedition, a Spanish convoy that vanished in this region in 1784. Harrington elaborated, led by Captain Diego Vasquez, who was rumored to be embezzling from the crown. Fascinating that you should find this here. What would such an item be worth? Thomas asked casually. To collectors, thousands potentially. To historians, priceless. Harrington carefully returned the ring. Mr. Blackhawk, if you've found other artifacts, they should be properly documented. The historical significance could be tremendous. Thomas nodded non-committally. I'll consider it. Later, while Sarah showed the professor her school books, Eleanor spoke quietly to Thomas on the porch. He can be trusted, she assured him. James has dedicated his life to preserving history, not profiting from it. And if what I found is more than just a few artifacts? Thomas asked. If it's a significant treasure? Eleanor didn't flinch. Then you'll need someone with his credentials, even more. There will be legal questions, claims from multiple parties. Before Thomas could respond, Harrington joined them, excitement evident despite his scholarly restraint. Miss Blackhawk, the ring you showed me. It's consistent with items carried by Spanish military commanders of the period. If you found other artifacts, they could help solve a historical mystery that's puzzled scholars for a century. Thomas weighed his options. The professor seemed genuine, and Eleanor trusted him. Perhaps it was time to share more of the truth. There is something else, Thomas admitted. A journal. Harrington's eyes widened as Thomas retrieved Vasquez's journal from its hiding place. The professor handled it reverently, his translation confirming what Eleanor had already discovered. This changes everything, Harrington breathed. Vasquez admits to diverting the convoy, hiding the gold, even killing 2 of his own men who threatened to report him. What does this mean for Thomas? Eleanor pressed. Harrington looked up gravely. Legally speaking, treasure found on private property belongs to the landowner. However, he hesitated. When items have significant historical value or involve multiple national interests, complications arise. Meaning? Thomas asked. The Spanish government could make a claim. The territorial government certainly will. And if the treasure includes items taken from native peoples, as was common practice, Harrington trailed off. Then my people might have claim as well, Thomas finished. The serpent ring glinted on the table between them, its ruby eyes seeming to watch the proceedings with ancient, knowing malice. Like the creature it depicted, the treasure's beauty concealed deadly complications. I need time to think, Thomas said finally. But I believe we may need your help, Professor. Harrington nodded solemnly. Whatever you decide, Mr. Blackhawk, tread carefully. History teaches us that treasure often carries a heavy price. The meeting with Professor Harrington left Thomas with more questions than answers. After seeing their visitors off, he sat with Sarah on the porch steps, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. "Papa, are we in trouble?" Sarah asked, her small face serious in the fading light. Thomas put his arm around her. "Not trouble, little one. Just at a crossroads, like in your stories where the hero must choose a path." "Exactly like that." Thomas smiled, once again struck by his daughter's perceptiveness. "And like those heroes, we must choose wisely." The next morning, Thomas made a decision. "We're taking a trip," he told Sarah, "to Junction City." Unlike Copper Springs, Junction City was large enough to have a proper courthouse and lawyers who didn't answer directly to local interests, like Preston Wells. Thomas had visited once years ago, trading furs. They departed at dawn, Thomas's rifle across his saddle and the Colt at his hip. Sarah rode behind him, clutching her eagle feather for luck. The journey took most of the day, with Thomas frequently checking to ensure they weren't followed. Junction City bustled with activity. The railroad had reached it 2 years prior, bringing commerce and growth. Thomas felt the familiar stares as he rode down the main street, an Apache man and his mixed-blood daughter, an unusual sight among the predominantly white population. At the courthouse, Thomas inquired after a land attorney and was directed to the offices of William Hayes, a gray-haired man with spectacles and a no-nonsense demeanor. "How can I help you?" Hayes asked, showing neither the condescension nor false friendliness Thomas often encountered. "I need to understand my legal rights regarding my property," Thomas explained. "Specifically about items found on that property." Hayes nodded. "Straightforward enough. You own land in the territory, a cabin and surrounding acreage near Copper Springs, inherited from my uncle. And you found something valuable, I take it." When Thomas hesitated, Hayes added, "I'm bound by confidentiality, Mr. Blackhawk. What we discuss remains private." Thomas decided on partial honesty. Historical artifacts, possibly quite valuable. Hayes removed his spectacles, polishing them thoughtfully. "The law is clear. Items found on private property belong to the landowner, with certain exceptions for human remains or items of extraordinary cultural significance to indigenous peoples." The items appear to be Spanish in origin, from the late 1700s. And Hayes replaced his spectacles. That introduces potential complexity. However, Spanish claims would be tenuous at best, given the time elapsed and changes in territorial governance. The lawyer pulled several leather-bound volumes from his shelves, consulting specific passages before continuing. "Your best protection would be ensuring your land title is unassailable. Is your deed properly registered with the Territorial Land Office?" Thomas frowned. "I assumed my uncle handled that. Many don't, especially in remote areas." Hayes scribbled a note. "First step, secure an official territorial land grant, confirming your ownership." For the next hour, Hayes educated Thomas on property law, treasure rights, and the importance of proper documentation. Thomas listened intently, asking occasional questions that impressed the lawyer with their insight. "One last question," Thomas said finally. "If I were to find something of historical significance, what would be my obligation to report it?" Hayes considered carefully. "Legally, minimal. Morally, that's your determination. Some historical items belong in museums, where all can benefit from their educational value." Thomas nodded, mind made up. "I'd like to proceed with obtaining the territorial land grant." By late afternoon, Thomas had paid Hayes a retainer, signed necessary paperwork, and received a crash course in territorial property law. The lawyer promised to expedite the land grant documentation, sensing his client's urgency. "One more thing," Thomas said before leaving. "I have reason to believe others may challenge my ownership. A man named Garrett Sloan has made offers, then threats." Hayes's expression hardened. "Describe these threats." After Thomas explained, the lawyer wrote another note. "I'll include affidavits regarding these intimidation attempts with your filing. Make the territorial officials aware of potential impropriety." As they rode away from Junction City, Sarah clutched Thomas's waist, tired from the long day. "Did the man help us, Papa?" "Yes," Thomas replied. He's helping us protect what's ours. A week later, a courier delivered a package to the cabin, the official territorial land grant, bearing the governor's seal and confirming Thomas Blackhawk as legal owner of the property and all improvements and discoveries thereon. Thomas traced the ornate lettering of the document. This paper, with its official stamps and seals, represented more than property rights. For an Apache man in white man's territory, it was rare protection under their own law. That evening, Thomas showed the document to Sarah. "This says the treasure is legally ours," he explained. "Now we must decide what that means, for us and for others." Sarah considered this with solemn eyes. What would Mama say we should do? The question pierced Thomas's heart. She would say that great wealth brings great responsibility. "Then that's what we'll do," Sarah said simply. "Be responsible." Thomas was splitting firewood when he spotted the dust cloud of approaching riders. His hand moved instinctively to the Colt, but he relaxed upon recognizing Eleanor's buggy, accompanied by Professor Harrington on horseback. Their expressions, however, gave him pause. Both looked troubled. "Thomas," Eleanor called as they approached, "we have news, not all good, I'm afraid." Once inside, with Sarah occupied drawing pictures at the table, Harrington explained, "I spoke with a colleague at the Territorial University about the historical significance of the Vasquez Journal. Hypothetically, of course." Thomas's expression hardened. "You told someone else?" "No names or specific locations," Harrington assured him. "But word spreads quickly in academic circles. Now there's interest from the Historical Society about potential Spanish artifacts in the region." "That's not all," Eleanor added grimly. "A reporter from the Territorial Gazette was asking questions in town yesterday. Someone mentioned your cabin and old Spanish things." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Sarah's classmate. The girl she mentioned the coins to." "Sheriff Mills has been watching your comings and goings," Eleanor continued, "and Preston Wells has been meeting privately with men from out of town." Harrington leaned forward. "Mr. Blackhawk, if you've indeed found what I suspect, this situation will escalate quickly. You need to document everything officially before others try to stake claims." Thomas nodded. "I've secured a territorial land grant. My ownership is legally sound." "That's excellent," Harrington said, "but historical treasures attract powerful interests. The territorial governor himself might become involved." "What do you suggest?" Thomas asked. "Let me help document the find properly," Harrington proposed. "Create an official academic record establishing provenance and historical context. This protects both your interests and the artifact's historical significance." Thomas considered this, then retrieved the journal and several smaller artifacts he'd previously selected as safe to reveal. Harrington examined each with scholarly enthusiasm, while Eleanor took careful notes. Their scholarly discussion was interrupted by the sound of approaching horses. Several of them. Thomas moved to the window, cursing under his breath. "Sheriff Mills and Preston Wells." With papers, he turned to his guests. "Take Sarah to the back room, please." Thomas stepped onto the porch as the men approached. Besides the sheriff and banker, he recognized one of Sloane's men and two strangers in suits. "Blackhawk," Mills called, adjusting his badge self-importantly. "Got some legal matters to discuss." Wells dismounted, a thin smile on his face. "Nothing to be concerned about, just some questions regarding the legitimacy of your property claim." One of the suited men stepped forward. "Territorial Land Office," he announced. "We're investigating a potential error in recent land grants." Thomas crossed his arms. "My deed is properly registered. I have the territorial grant with the governor's seal." "Yes, well," Wells interjected, "it appears there may have been an oversight. These gentlemen have uncovered documents suggesting the original sale to your uncle was invalid." The second suited man produced papers from a leather portfolio. "These records indicate the property was previously deeded to the Wells Banking Trust in 1875, before the alleged sale to Joseph Blackhawk." Thomas's mind raced. "That's impossible. My uncle purchased it legally from Emmett Taylor in 1877. Wells smiled thinly. Taylor apparently didn't have clear title to sell. My grandfather's bank had already foreclosed on the property. Thomas recognized the scheme instantly, forged documents to invalidate his claim, likely created after interest in the treasure emerged. I'll need to have my attorney review these allegations, Thomas stated firmly. Sheriff Mills stepped forward. In the meantime, we have authority to inspect the property for assessment purposes. You have no such authority, came Harrington's voice as he emerged from the cabin. Not without a proper court order signed by a judge. Mills squinted. And who might you be? Professor James Harrington, Smithsonian Institution. He approached confidently. I'm documenting historically significant artifacts found on Miss Blackhawk's property, artifacts that would fall under federal protection laws. The mention of federal involvement caused visible discomfort among the visitors. The land office representative shifted nervously. This is a territorial matter, Wells insisted. Perhaps, Harrington replied, but I've already telegraphed my colleagues in Washington about the historical significance of this site. The Smithsonian takes a keen interest in preserving such discoveries from local interference. An uncomfortable silence followed as Wells and the officials exchanged glances. We'll return with proper documentation, the land office man finally stated, his confidence visibly diminished. After they departed, Thomas turned to Harrington. Thank you, but this isn't over. No, the professor agreed. In fact, it's just beginning. Those documents they produced, almost certainly forgeries, but effective ones, Thomas noted grimly. They're trying to use the legal system against me. Eleanor, who had been comforting Sarah, joined them. Wells' grandfather was indeed the banker here during that period. He's creating a paper trail that would be difficult to disprove after so many years. Thomas stared in the direction the men had departed. I need to move some of the treasure immediately. They'll be back, possibly with enough men to simply take what they want. Where will you hide it? Eleanor asked. Better you don't know, Thomas replied. But I'll need your help creating a diversion tomorrow while I move. That night, after their guests departed with promises to return the next day, Thomas sat alone on the porch, examining the forged document they'd left behind. The yellowed paper and faded ink looked convincingly aged, but the fraud was clear to anyone who knew what to look for. The stakes had just risen dramatically. This was no longer about simple property rights. It was about powerful men willing to falsify history itself to claim what they wanted. Before dawn, Thomas woke Sarah. Remember what I told you about being brave? He whispered. She nodded, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Today we need to move quickly and quietly, he explained. Pack only what you can carry in one small bundle. While Sarah gathered her few treasured possessions, Thomas retrieved a small iron key from inside his boot. The key to a hiding place he'd prepared days earlier. Behind the cabin stood an old tool shed, seemingly on the verge of collapse. Beneath its rotting floorboards, Thomas had dug a small chamber reinforced with salvaged timber. As the eastern sky lightened, Thomas and Sarah worked methodically, transferring selected items from the treasure chamber to canvas sacks. The most valuable and portable pieces, gold coins, jewelry, and the Vasquez journal, would go to the shed cellar. Larger items would remain hidden beneath the cabin for now. Like a secret mission, Sarah whispered, taking the task seriously. Thomas smiled despite the gravity of their situation. His daughter's spirit remained unbroken by their circumstances. By mid-morning they had secured the most valuable portions of the treasure in the shed's hidden cellar. Locked with the iron key Thomas now wore on a leather cord around his neck. He had just finished concealing the entrance when dust clouds appeared on the horizon. Inside, quickly, he told Sarah, his hand moving to the Colt. The approaching party was larger than before. Sheriff Mills, Preston Wells, and at least 6 other men, including Garrett Sloan and his rough companions. 2 wagons followed, laden with equipment that looked ominously like mining tools. Thomas positioned himself on the porch, rifle visible but not aimed. That's far enough, he called when they were within earshot. Mills rode forward, looking uncomfortable but determined. Blackhawk, I have papers here authorizing examination of this property for mineral rights assessment. Show me, Thomas demanded. The sheriff extended a document bearing official-looking seals. Thomas examined it carefully, recognizing another deception. This wasn't a legal court order, merely an application for mineral rights exploration. This grants no authority to enter my property, Thomas stated firmly, handing it back. It's an application, not an authorization. Wells moved his horse forward. Mr. Blackhawk, we have reason to believe valuable minerals exist on this property. The territorial government has approved preliminary assessment. I've filed objections through my attorney, Thomas replied. No action can proceed until those are addressed. This is becoming tiresome, Sloane interjected, his facade of civility wearing thin. We know what you found, Blackhawk. Make this easy on yourself and your daughter. At the mention of Sarah, Thomas's expression hardened. Threaten my child again, and our next conversation will be very different. Tension hung heavy in the air, as both sides assessed each other. Thomas was outnumbered, but his position on the porch offered tactical advantage, and they couldn't be certain how well armed he might be. We'll give you until tomorrow morning, Sloane finally said. Gather your belongings and vacate the premises. You'll be compensated fairly. This is my land, legally deeded and granted, Thomas responded. I'm not leaving. Then we'll return with the territorial marshal, Wells threatened. After the men withdrew to a distance of about 200 yards, they established a makeshift camp, clearly intending to prevent Thomas from leaving or receiving assistance. Inside the cabin, Thomas found Sarah at the window, watching. Are we under siege, Papa? Like in the fort stories. Something like that, Thomas admitted. But we have friends, and we've prepared. As if summoned by his words, a young Apache boy appeared at the back of the property, having approached unseen through the brush. Thomas recognized him as Running Fox, son of Whitebird from the nearby settlement. My mother sent me, the boy said in Apache. She says you have trouble with white men. Thomas nodded, quickly writing a note to Eleanor explaining their situation. Take this to the white woman teacher in town. Tell no one else. As dusk fell, Thomas counted 8 men surrounding the property, with campfires indicating their positions. Inside, he and Sarah ate a cold dinner, avoiding lighting their own fire to prevent silhouetting themselves against the windows. Will they try to come in during the night? Sarah asked, her voice small but steady. They might, Thomas answered honestly, but I've set alarms, and I won't sleep. Sarah touched the eagle feather in her hair. I'm not afraid, Papa. This is our home. Thomas felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. Just for tonight, we'll sleep in the root cellar beneath the kitchen. It's safer there. As Sarah dozed on a bedroll in the musty cellar, Thomas kept vigil by the small ventilation opening that offered a view of the cabin's surroundings. The iron key pressed against his chest beneath his shirt, a constant reminder of what they were fighting for. Not just gold, he reminded himself, their future, their dignity, their right to determine their own fate in a land that had taken so much from his people. Outside, one of Sloane's men ventured too close to an alarm line, sending tin cans clattering. The man cursed and retreated as Thomas's rifle barrel emerged from a window. The siege had begun in earnest. Dawn broke with Thomas already awake, having dozed only in brief intervals throughout the night. The men surrounding the cabin had maintained their positions, occasionally calling out taunts or threats that Thomas ignored. Sarah slept fitfully, finally waking as sunlight filtered through the cellar's small vent. They're still there? She asked, rubbing her eyes. Thomas nodded, but they've made no move to approach. After a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack, Thomas continued his surveillance. Through his rifle scope, he observed the men growing restless, conferring with Sloane, who appeared increasingly agitated. Mid-morning brought an unexpected sight: movement in the hills to the west, where the Apache settlement lay. Thomas tensed, focusing his scope. Several figures on horseback were approaching, led by a man whose erect posture and distinctive headdress Thomas recognized immediately. "White Hawk," he murmured.
Sarah rushed to his side. "Uncle White Hawk is coming, though not a blood relation.
Whitehawk was Thomas's mother's brother in the Apache way, a respected elder and tribal leader. So Sloane's men had noticed the approaching group as well, their posture changing from casual intimidation to alert weariness. 8 Apache riders advanced steadily, each carrying a rifle but approaching openly without stealth. Thomas stepped onto the porch as they drew near, making no attempt to hide. "Stay inside," he told Sarah, though he kept the door open so she could watch. Sloane intercepted the Apache group before they reached the cabin, Sheriff Mills hurrying to join him. Though too distant to hear their conversation, Thomas could read the tension in their postures. Whitehawk simply rode around them, his companions forming a protective formation. The sheriff, clearly uncomfortable with the situation's changing dynamics, made no move to stop them. When they reached the cabin, Whitehawk dismounted with the dignity of his 60 years. He carried a ceremonial staff adorned with eagle feathers and symbolic carvings, a sign he came in an official tribal capacity. "Nephew," he greeted Thomas in Apache, "we heard of your trouble." Thomas inclined his head respectfully. "The boy delivered my message?" "The teacher woman came herself to our council," Whitehawk replied. "She spoke of men who would take what is yours by false papers." The other Apache men dismounted, positioning themselves strategically around the cabin. None made threatening moves, but their presence created a clear protective barrier. "We will camp here," Whitehawk stated simply, "until this matter is resolved." Thomas was momentarily speechless. Relations between his uncle's family and the tribal settlement had been cordial but distant. This show of solidarity was unexpected. Sarah emerged from the cabin, running to embrace Whitehawk. "You came to help us." The elder's weathered face softened as he patted her head. "Little Sparrow grows strong," he observed, using his special name for her. "She has her mother's spirit." Across the property, Sloane and his men conferred urgently. The arrival of armed Apache men had clearly not figured into their plans. "They won't leave," Thomas told Whitehawk. "They believe there is treasure here." The elder's eyes showed understanding. "And is there?" Thomas nodded slightly. Whitehawk absorbed this without surprise. "The old ones spoke of Spanish gold hidden from our raiders," he said quietly. "Perhaps it was meant to return to our people through you." Throughout the day, an uneasy stalemate held. The Apache men established a small camp near the cabin, their presence forcing Sloane's men to maintain a respectful distance. Sheriff Mills departed, visibly relieved to extract himself from the increasingly complicated situation. By afternoon, more unexpected visitors arrived. Eleanor and Professor Harrington, accompanied by a man Thomas recognized as Wilson, the Gazette editor. Sloane attempted to prevent their approach, but retreated when Whitehawk and 2 younger Apache men rode out to escort them through. "We've brought reinforcements of our own," Eleanor announced, dismounting. "Mr. Wilson is interested in reporting on how certain parties are attempting to intimidate a legal property owner." The editor scribbled divs as Harrington explained the situation's historical significance, emphasizing the potential cultural importance of artifacts discovered on the property. "And I've telegraphed colleagues at the Smithsonian," Harrington added. "They're quite interested in ensuring any historical finds are properly documented rather than disappearing into private collections." Thomas observed Sloane watching these developments with barely concealed fury. The simple plan to intimidate a lone Apache man had transformed into a much more public and complicated standoff. That evening, as they shared a meal around the Apache campfire, Whitehawk presented Thomas with a smaller version of his ceremonial staff. "This carries the authority of our people," he explained. "It shows you speak not just for yourself, but for all Apache when you defend what is yours." Thomas accepted the gift with appropriate solemnity, understanding its significance. With the staff came not just support, but responsibility, to use whatever wealth they found in ways that would honor his heritage. "We stand together," Whitehawk declared, loud enough for watching ears, "as we have always stood against those who would take what is not theirs." Under the stars, with allies gathered around them, the siege took on a different character. Thomas and Sarah were no longer alone, and for the first time since the treasure's discovery, he felt a flicker of hope that they might emerge from this not just alive, but victorious. The standoff entered its third day with growing tension. More people had gathered, curious townsfolk drawn by rumors, 2 more reporters from larger papers, and several Apache families who arrived to support Whitehawk's vigil. Sloane's men maintained their positions but seemed increasingly uncertain. Thomas watched from the porch as a rider approached from town at a gallop. One of Sloane's men intercepted him, and an animated conversation ensued. The messenger handed over an envelope, then departed hastily. "Something's changed," Thomas remarked to Eleanor, who had remained to document events for historical record. They observed Sloane reading the message, his expression darkening. In apparent frustration, he crumpled the paper and tossed it aside, storming back to his tent. "I'll be right back," Eleanor said with a meaningful glance. She casually walked the perimeter of the gathering, engaging various onlookers in conversation. When she passed near where Sloane had discarded the paper, she bent as if adjusting her boot, smoothly retrieving the crumpled message. "A telegraph," she told Thomas moments later, unfolding the paper carefully. "From someone signing as WT in the territorial capital." Thomas read the message. "Sloane, stop situation becoming public embarrassment. Stop, resolve immediately or withdraw. Stop arriving tomorrow to handle personally. Stop, confirm Blackhawk. Still has journal. Stop, essential to secure. Stop, Senator WTTT. Senator WT Harrington mused, joining them. Must be William Thornton. He chairs the Territorial Development Committee and has significant mining interests. Why would a territorial senator involve himself in this? Thomas wondered. Harrington's expression grew thoughtful. "I've been researching Vasquez's background since examining the journal. There were rumors he had an American associate, a trader who helped him plan the gold theft. And you think this senator is connected? It's worth investigating. Thornton's family has been in the territory for generations. His great-grandfather was a trader who operated in this region during the Spanish period. That afternoon, Harrington rode to Copper Springs to send telegrams to colleagues who might have information on Thornton's family history. Eleanor accompanied him, intending to research old newspaper archives. They returned after nightfall, faces animated with discovery. "Thomas," Eleanor said quietly, gathering Sarah, Whitehawk, and Wilson, the newspaper editor, in the cabin. "We found something remarkable." Harrington spread several papers on the table. Territorial archives confirmed that Senator Thornton's great-grandfather was William Thornton Sr., a merchant who traded with Spanish settlements in the 70s. He suddenly became wealthy around 1785, the year after the Vasquez expedition disappeared. "That's circumstantial," Thomas noted. "This isn't," Eleanor interjected, producing a yellowed newspaper clipping. From the East Coast, William Thornton Sr.'s obituary mentions he made his fortune in the Western Territories through partnership with Spanish enterprises. "And this," Harrington added, unfolding a document, a letter from the Spanish governor in Mexico City to Madrid, reporting that Captain Vasquez had an American accomplice suspected in his gold theft, a trader described as tall with distinctive white hair. Thornton family portraits show exactly that trait across generations. Thomas absorbed this information. So the senator is Vasquez's accomplice, descendant. He likely knows about the treasure from family history, and the journal would prove his family's wealth came from theft, Eleanor concluded. Whitehawk nodded gravely. "A powerful man protecting his family name. That's why Sloane was so focused on finding the journal," Thomas realized. "It's not just about the gold," Wilson scribbled notes furiously. "This story gets better by the hour. Territorial senator's family fortune built on stolen Spanish gold, his desperate attempts to cover up historical evidence." Sarah, who had been listening quietly, piped up. "So he's the real bad guy, not Mr. Sloane or Sheriff Mills." "Exactly," Thomas confirmed, touched by her understanding. "And a much more dangerous one." The following morning brought another dust cloud on the horizon. a large carriage accompanied by mounted men in what appeared to be unofficial uniforms. As they drew closer, Thomas recognized the territorial seal on the carriage door. Sloane rushed to greet the new arrival, his body language differential. From the carriage emerged a distinguished-looking man in his 60s, silver-haired and imperiously upright. His expensive suit and commanding presence marked him clearly as a man accustomed to authority. "Senator Thornton, I presume," Harrington murmured. Thomas watched as Thornton surveyed the scene with evident displeasure. The gathered Apache families, the reporters, the growing crowd of witnesses. This was clearly not the private intimidation he had anticipated. "We should invite the senator to join us," Thomas decided, his voice steady. "It's time to bring this into the open." White Hawk rose, ceremonial staff in hand. "I will extend the invitation. Let him face Apache hospitality and justice together." As White Hawk approached the new arrivals, his dignity and authority evident in every step, Thomas felt a strange sense of worlds colliding. Spanish conquest, Apache resistance, American ambition, all converging on this small patch of desert because of decisions made a century before. Thornton's face, even at a distance, showed recognition of the changing dynamics. What had begun as a simple land grab had evolved into something far more complicated and public. "Papa," Sarah whispered, slipping her hand into his. "Are we winning?" Thomas squeezed her small fingers. "Not yet, little one, but for the first time I believe we might." Senator Thornton's arrival transformed the standoff. Where Sloane had employed threats and ended, Thornton brought political finesse and a veneer of legitimacy. He established himself at the center of the opposing camp, receiving visitors and presenting himself as an arbiter rather than an adversary. "The senator wishes to discuss a mutually beneficial resolution," announced a well-dressed aide, who approached the cabin that afternoon. "A private meeting at your convenience." "Tell the senator I'm happy to meet," Thomas replied. "Here, in the open, with witnesses present." The aide's smile tightened. "The senator prefers discretion in delicate matters." "I'm sure he does," Thomas said evenly. "My answer stands." By evening, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, promising the first significant rainfall in weeks. The crowd of onlookers began to disperse, seeking shelter in town. Even some of the Apache families departed, though White Hawk and his closest associates remained. "A storm comes," White Hawk observed, not referring only to the weather. Thomas nodded, surveying their diminished numbers. The timing felt too convenient, nature providing cover for whatever Thornton planned next. Inside the cabin, Thomas prepared Sarah for the night ahead. "I need you to be especially brave," he told her. "If anything happens, you remember the hiding place we practiced." Sarah nodded solemnly. "Under the floorboards in the kitchen, behind the flour barrel. Stay silent until you or White Hawk comes." "That's right." Thomas fastened a small necklace of river shells around her neck, a gift he'd made during happier days. "For good luck," he said, kissing her forehead. Eleanor and Harrington had reluctantly returned to town before the storm, promising to bring additional help in the morning. Wilson remained, eager for his story, though Thomas had insisted he sleep in the Apache camp rather than the cabin. As darkness fell, rain began to pelt the roof. Thomas positioned himself near a window, the Colt revolver loaded beside him. Every few minutes, lightning illuminated the landscape, showing Thornton's men still in position despite the downpour. "Papa," Sarah whispered, unable to sleep. "Would Mama be scared?" Thomas smiled softly. "Your mother feared very little, but she was also wise enough to know when caution was needed." "I'm trying to be wise too," Sarah said, touching her shell necklace. Shortly after midnight, with the storm at its peak, Thomas detected movement outside, shadows moving between lightning flashes. He positioned Sarah behind the kitchen cabinet. "Remember, not a sound," he whispered. "No matter what you hear." He slipped outside through the back window, circling to approach the shed where he'd hidden the most valuable portions of the treasure. As suspected, 2 men were attempting to force the door, while another stood watch. Rather than confronting them, Thomas circled back toward the Apache camp. Whitehawk and his men were already alert, having noticed the intruders. More at the cabin, Thomas warned in Apache. They're using the storm for cover. Back at the cabin, Thomas entered silently through his prepared route beneath the porch. From his hiding spot under the floorboards, he could see boots moving above, at least 3 men searching methodically. It has to be here somewhere, a cultured voice said. Thomas recognized Thornton himself. The journal is the priority. The gold is secondary. What about the Apache and his brat? Asked a gruffer voice. Find them, but no unnecessary violence. Thornton replied sharply. We need the journal without creating martyrs. The situation is already too public. Thomas remained hidden, gathering intelligence rather than engaging. Sarah was secure in her hiding place, and confrontation now would only risk lives. Senator, called another voice. We've checked everything, no sign of any hidden compartments or treasures. Thornton cursed softly. He must have moved it. Check the outbuildings again. From his position, Thomas could see Sarah's small form pressed against the wall of her hiding place, perfectly still despite the men trampling overhead. Her hands clutched the shell necklace, lips moving in silent prayer, as her mother had taught her. The search continued for nearly an hour, growing increasingly destructive as Thornton's frustration mounted. Furniture was overturned, floorboards pried up, though fortunately not in the kitchen's far corner where Sarah hid. It's not here, Senator, reported one man finally. Either our information was wrong, or he's hidden it elsewhere. Impossible, Thornton snapped. The Apache has no resources, no other property. It must be here or buried nearby. Another man entered, dripping with rain. Senator, we may have a problem. The Indian camp is stirring, and I saw movement in the trees to the east. Thornton seemed to weigh his options. We can't be caught here like common thieves. Withdraw for now. We'll return with official authorization tomorrow. After they departed, Thomas waited 10 full minutes before retrieving Sarah from her hiding place. She emerged shaking but dry-eyed, the shell necklace clutched in her small fist. You were perfect, Thomas whispered, embracing her. As silent as your Apache ancestors. Whitehawk and 2 younger men arrived moments later, having tracked the intruder's retreat. The White Chief shows his true nature, Whitehawk observed, surveying the destruction. Thomas nodded grimly, and we have witnesses. Wilson, the newspaper editor, appeared from the shadows where he'd been observing, notepad already in hand. Got every word, he confirmed. The senator breaking into a legal property owner's home during a storm, searching for something he has no right to. We need more than words, Thomas said. By morning he'll have fabricated some official justification. Not if we expose him first, Wilson replied, eyes bright with journalistic fervor. I'm writing for the telegraph office now. This story will reach Phoenix and Santa Fe by noon tomorrow. As Wilson departed and the storm began to abate, Thomas sat with Sarah on the porch steps, his arm around her shoulders. The shell necklace brought us luck, she said, examining each small piece. No, little one, Thomas corrected gently. Your courage brought us through. The shells just reminded you of the strength you already had. 3 days after the break-in, Thomas found himself in the Junction City courthouse. Wilson's telegraphed story had created a sensation, forcing the territorial governor to intervene. Rather than allow the situation to escalate further, he had ordered an emergency hearing before Judge Hollister, known for his independence from territorial politics. Thomas adjusted his borrowed suit, Harrington's, hastily altered and touched the small silver pendant Eleanor had pressed into his palm that morning. The scales of justice, she had explained. My father was a judge back east. He always said these reminded him that the law should weigh all people equally. Thomas had smiled at the gesture, though experience had taught him justice rarely balanced evenly for an Apache. The courtroom buzzed with spectators. The case had drawn attention throughout the territory, a Native American standing against a powerful senator, with Spanish gold and historical artifacts at stake. Reporters filled the back row, Wilson prominently among them. Sarah sat beside Eleanor in the front row, wearing her best dress, her shell necklace visible at her throat. Behind them, Whitehawk and several tribal elders provided a dignified presence. On the opposing side, Senator Thornton conferred with a team of lawyers. He appeared confident despite the newspaper accounts of the break-in, having issued a statement claiming he had been investigating reports of historical artifacts being improperly removed from territorial lands. Judge Hollister, a thin man with piercing eyes, called the court to order. This hearing will address multiple petitions regarding the property and alleged discoveries of one Thomas Blackhawk, he announced. We will proceed efficiently and without grandstand. Thornton's lead attorney spoke first, presenting documents purporting to show irregularities in Thomas's land title. Furthermore, he continued smoothly, any artifacts of historical significance are subject to territorial claim under the Antiquities Preservation. William Hayes, Thomas's attorney, countered by presenting the official territorial land grant. My client's ownership is unassailable, he stated firmly. As for the alleged artifacts, the law clearly states that items found on private property belong to the landowner, with specific exceptions that do not apply here. The legal arguments continued for an hour, with citations and counter-citations growing increasingly technical. Thomas watched the judge carefully, noting how he questioned both sides with equal sharpness. When Professor Harrington took the stand as an expert witness, the proceedings took a dramatic turn. In my professional opinion, Harrington testified, the journal and artifacts discovered by Mr. Blackhawk represent one of the most significant historical finds in territorial history. They appear to resolve the mystery of the Vasquez expedition, which disappeared in 1784, with a substantial shipment of gold. And who would have legal claim to such gold? The judge asked. That's complex, Harrington admitted. The Spanish crown might have had a claim originally, but after Mexican independence and the subsequent American territorial acquisition, those rights became historically moot. Mr. Blackhawk's claim as the property owner is actually the most legally sound. Senator Thornton's expression darkened as Harrington continued, explaining the historical significance of Vasquez's journal and its implications. Your Honor, Thomas's attorney interjected, we would like to address the events of 3 nights ago, when Senator Thornton personally led an illegal entry into my client's home during a storm. The senator leapt to his feet. Preposterous. I was conducting an official inspection after receiving reports of historical artifacts being mishandled. Without a warrant or court order. Judge Hollister asked sharply. Before Thornton could respond, Wilson was called to testify, recounting what he had witnessed during the break-in. His detailed notes included direct quotes from the senator about needing to find the journal above all else. The courtroom stirred when Sarah was called next. Thomas had initially objected to her testimony, but Hayes had convinced him of its importance. Miss Blackhawk, the judge said gently, can you tell the court what happened during the storm? Sarah stood straight, her voice clear despite her youth. Papa told me to hide in our special place beneath the kitchen floor. Men came in and started searching everywhere. They broke our furniture and pulled up floorboards. Did you recognize any of these men? Hayes asked. Sarah pointed without hesitation. Him. The senator. He was giving orders. He said they needed to find the journal before anyone else did. Thornton's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. The court cannot take the word of a child, an Indian child at that. Senator, Judge Hollister warned, outbursts will not be tolerated. The hearing's momentum shifted decisively when Eleanor presented her research into Thornton's family history, including the connection to Vasquez's American accomplice. These historical records, she explained, suggest that the senator's family fortune originated with gold diverted from the Spanish convoy. The journal Mr. Blackhawk discovered would provide proof of this historical theft. Thornton's lawyers objected vehemently, but the damage was done. Murmurs spread through the courtroom as the senator's personal interest in the case became clear. Judge Hollister called a brief recess, during which Thomas sat quietly, fingering the silver scales pendant. When court resumed, the judge's expression was resolute. I am issuing an immediate injunction protecting Mr. Blackhawk's property rights, he announced. Furthermore, I am ordering an official archaeological assessment of the artifacts under Professor Harrington's supervision, with Mr. Blackhawk's cooperation and consent. He leveled a stern gaze at Senator Thornton. The allegations of breaking and entering will be referred to the territorial prosecutor for investigation. This court will reconvene in 30 days to address final disposition of the historical artifact. As the courtroom erupted in conversation, Thomas felt Sarah's arms wrap around his waist. "Did we win, Papa?" Thomas smiled cautiously. "The first battle, yes, but the war continues." Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded them. Thomas stood tall, the silver sails of justice catching the sunlight as he spoke carefully about historical preservation and his rights as a property owner. Across the street, Senator Thornton watched with cold fury before climbing into his carriage. This public humiliation would not go unanswered. Thomas was certain of that. A week after the hearing, Thomas sat at a rough-hewn table in Whitehawk's dwelling. Around him gathered an unusual assembly. Whitehawk and 3 tribal elders, Eleanor, Professor Harrington, William Hayes, and a representative from the territorial governor's office named Collins. "You've given this considerable thought," Hayes observed, as Thomas outlined his proposal. "I have," Thomas confirmed. "The treasure came to us for a reason, but brings responsibility with it." The days following the court victory had been filled with careful reflection. Though Judge Hollister's injunction protected Thomas's immediate rights, the final disposition of the treasure remained undetermined. Rather than await others' decisions, Thomas had decided to shape his own destiny. The Spanish artifacts of historical significance should be preserved in museums, Thomas explained, with proper recognition of their connection to both Spanish and Apache history. Harrington nodded approvingly. The Smithsonian would ensure they're exhibited with accurate historical context. Thomas continued, "A portion of the gold's value should establish an educational foundation for Apache children and others in the territory who lack schooling opportunities." Ambitious, Collins remarked. "The territorial legislature would need to approve such an arrangement, which is why 20% of the foundation's board would be appointed by the governor." Thomas replied, having anticipated this concern. The discussion continued for hours, addressing every aspect of Thomas's comprehensive proposal: historical preservation, educational initiatives, restoration of Apache sacred sites, community development in Copper Springs, and provisions for Sarah's future. Whitehawk, who had listened silently for most of the meeting, finally spoke. "You offer much to others, nephew. What do you keep for yourself?" Thomas smiled slightly, "Enough to build a proper home, establish a small ranch, and ensure Sarah receives the education her mother wanted for her. I have simple needs." "The senator will fight this," Collins warned. "He still has considerable influence, which is why everything must be transparent and beneficial to many interests," Thomas replied. "Make it difficult for any one person to oppose without appearing selfish." As the meeting concluded, Thomas retrieved Sarah's eagle feather from a beaded pouch. Over the past days, he had carefully crafted it into a writing quill, preserving its significance while giving it new purpose. "I will sign the proposal with this," he explained to the gathered witnesses. "It brought us luck when Sarah found the treasure. Now it will help determine the treasure's future." With the eagle feather quill, Thomas signed 4 copies of the document Hayes had prepared. Others added their signatures as witnesses, creating an agreement that would be difficult to challenge. Later that evening, as Thomas and Sarah sat on their cabin porch, watching the sunset, he explained what he had done. "So we're still rich, but we're sharing?" Sarah asked, trying to understand. "We have enough for all we need," Thomas explained. "The rest will help many people for many years. Your mother would be proud of this decision." Sarah considered this thoughtfully, like how she always shared our food with others, even when we didn't have much. "Exactly like that," Thomas smiled. "Wealth that helps no one becomes a burden." The following day, copies of Thomas's proposal were delivered to the territorial governor, Judge Hollister, and major newspapers. The public response was immediate and largely positive. Citizens appreciated both the generosity and the recognition of multiple historical claims. Senator Thornton, however, was not appeased. His counterattack came through proxies, newspaper editorials questioning Thomas's character. Rumors spread about uncivilized Apache being unable to manage wealth properly and political pressure on the governor to reject the proposal. "He's desperate," Eleanor observed when she brought news of these efforts. "The artifacts you found not only threaten his family's reputation, but his political narrative about civilizing the territory. He'll make a direct move soon," Thomas predicted. "This public campaign is just preparation." His prediction proved accurate when Sheriff Mills arrived the next day with several deputies and a document in hand. "Territorial subpoena," Mills announced uncomfortably, "requiring you to testify about alleged threats against Senator Thornton's representative." Hayes, who had anticipated such tactics, examined the document. "This is procedurally flawed," he noted. "We'll contest it immediately." Though the subpoena was successfully challenged, it signaled Thornton's strategy: legal harassment and character assassination rather than direct confrontation. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Thomas told Hayes. "How quickly can we establish the foundation and transfer the artifacts to the Smithsonian's custody?" "With the governor's preliminary approval, we could begin within days," Hayes replied. "I'll prepare the necessary document." That night, Thomas added a final provision to his proposal, writing with the eagle feather quill by lamplight. This addition, made without consultation, designated a small but significant portion of the treasure for a specific purpose: insurance against whatever desperate measure Thornton might attempt next. "Papa," Sarah asked, watching him write, "are you worried?" Thomas set down the quill and pulled her close. "Cautious, not worried. When animals are most dangerous is when they're cornered. And the senator is cornered." "Yes," Thomas replied, looking toward the window where the stars shone brightly. "But so have we been, many times. And we're still here." Thomas knew something was wrong the moment Sarah didn't emerge from the schoolhouse. She was always first out, eager to tell him about her day. As other children streamed past, his worry deepened. Inside, Miss Thompson looked up from her desk with surprise. "Mr. Blackhawk." "Sarah left early today. Her uncle came to collect her." Thomas froze. "What uncle?" "A well-dressed gentleman. He had a note." Miss Thompson's expression shifted as realization dawned. "Oh no." Thomas rode hard for Copper Springs, straight to the sheriff's office. Mills was absent, but his deputy confirmed a group of men had departed toward the old Silverado mine an hour earlier. The senator was with them, the young deputy added, and a little girl. Thomas spurred his horse toward the abandoned mine 5 miles north of town. His mind raced with calculations. Sarah had been taken, and there was only one reason. Thornton was making his desperate move. At the Apache settlement, Thomas collected White Hawk and 4 warriors before continuing to the mine. The shaft had been abandoned years ago after a partial collapse, though the entrance remained accessible. "They will expect pursuit," White Hawk cautioned as they approached cautiously. Thomas nodded grimly. "Sarah knows to leave signs if she can." Sure enough, as they drew closer, Thomas spotted small markers, pebbles arranged in the Apache pattern he had taught her, pointing toward a side entrance rather than the main shaft. Leaving the others to maintain watch, Thomas slipped silently into the narrow passage, the Colt revolver ready. The tunnel opened into a larger chamber, dimly lit by lanterns. Voices echoed from ahead. "Your cooperation ensures the child's safety, Blackhawk," Thornton's voice called out. "Show yourself." Thomas remained hidden, assessing the situation. Through a gap in the timber supports, he could see Sarah sitting on a crate, unharmed but frightened. Beside her stood Sloane, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Thornton paced nearby, while 2 armed men guarded the main entrance. "I know you're here," Thornton continued. "My terms are simple: the Vasquez journal and the location of the gold. In exchange, your daughter goes free." Thomas moved silently through the shadows, positioning himself for advantage. He noticed Sarah's eyes tracking his movement, though she gave no sign. Last chance, Blackhawk. Thornton's voice had an edge of desperation now. Thomas emerged from the shadows, his gun holstered. Let her go first. Thornton turned, triumphant. The journal. Where is it? Safe, Thomas replied evenly, as is most of the treasure. Don't play games, Thornton snapped. My family's reputation is already compromised, Thomas interrupted. Copies of the journal are with the territorial governor, Judge Hollister, and Professor Harrington. Your family's connection to the stolen gold is known. Thornton's face contorted with fury. Then there's nothing to lose by eliminating you both. The Apache renegade and his half-breed daughter, killed while resisting arrest for theft of historical artifacts. You mean like these? Thomas withdrew a small object from his pocket, an obsidian arrowhead of obvious age and Apache design, found among your ancestors' stolen Spanish gold. Proof that the convoy also carried items taken from my people. The senator stared at the arrowhead, momentarily confused. The journal mentions Apache artifacts taken during earlier raids. Thomas continued, your family's wealth isn't just built on stolen Spanish gold, but on my people's sacred items as well. A rumble interrupted them, a tremor that sent dust cascading from the ceiling. The old mine shifted ominously. The supports are rotting, Sloane warned. Looking up nervously, we should leave now. Not until I have what I came for, Thornton insisted. Sarah's eyes met Thomas's. He gave an almost imperceptible nod, and she suddenly went limp, sliding off the crate to the floor. She's ill, Sloane exclaimed, bending toward her. In that moment of distraction, Thomas moved with the speed of his hunting days. 2 precise shots extinguished the lanterns, plunging the chamber into darkness, broken only by dust-filtered light from the entrance. Confusion erupted as the armed men fired blindly into the darkness. Thomas slipped around the perimeter, reached Sarah, and pulled her into a protected alcove. Another tremor, stronger this time, sent a support beam crashing down, blocking the main entrance. Panicked shouting filled the chamber as dust choked the air. This way, Thomas whispered to Sarah, guiding her toward the side passage he'd entered through. Wait, it was Sloane's voice, tinged with fear. Help us out. Thomas hesitated, then called back, follow my voice. Quickly. As they reached the passage, the ceiling gave way behind them. Thomas shielded Sarah with his body as debris crashed down. When the dust cleared, he saw the main chamber was now largely collapsed, with Thornton and 1 guard trapped on the far side. Sloane had managed to follow Thomas's voice and now stood shakily in the passage. The senator, he began, is alive, Thomas confirmed, seeing movement beyond the fallen rocks. But trapped until help arrives. Outside, White Hawk and the others rushed forward as Thomas emerged with Sarah and Sloane. There are men trapped inside, Thomas explained. Ride for help. As 2 warriors departed for town, Thomas held Sarah close, checking her for injuries. You left the signs, just as I taught you. She nodded, tears finally coming now that safety was reached. I remembered everything, and I wasn't scared much. From the mine entrance came Thornton's muffled voice, calling for help. The collapse had humbled him in a way no legal proceeding could have. Thomas looked at the ancient arrowhead, still clutched in his hand. A small piece of his people's history, returned after generations. Like the treasure, it had traveled a long and circuitous path to find its way home. What happens to the senator now? Sarah asked. Thomas tucked the arrowhead safely away. He faces his actions, just as we all must. 1 year later, Thomas stood on the porch of a new home built on the ridge overlooking his original cabin. The old structure had been preserved and transformed into a small museum housing selected artifacts from the treasure, with placards explaining their historical significance in both Spanish and Apache contexts. Papa, they're here, Sarah called, spotting dust clouds approaching on the road. Thomas straightened his tie, still an uncomfortable concession to formal occasions. Today marked the official opening of the Blackhawk Heritage Foundation, established with proceeds from the treasure. The territorial governor himself would attend, along with representatives from various communities and institutions. The past year had brought changes neither Thomas nor Sarah could have imagined when they first inherited the dilapidated cabin. Senator Thornton had survived the mine collapse, but faced multiple criminal charges. His desperate kidnapping attempt, coming after the break-in and legal harassment, had destroyed his political career and family reputation. He awaited trial under house arrest, his influence shattered. Garrett Sloan, who had cooperated with authorities, received a lighter sentence. His testimony revealed the extent of Thornton's obsession with erasing his family's connection to the stolen Spanish gold. As carriages and riders arrived, Thomas greeted guests alongside Sarah, who wore a new dress sewn by Eleanor. At 9 years old, she carried herself with surprising poise, having grown accustomed to attention since their discovery. Miss Blackhawk, the territorial governor, acknowledged with a handshake. A remarkable achievement, Thomas nodded respectfully. The Foundation will ensure the benefits extend beyond our family. Professor Harrington approached with officials from the Smithsonian. Under his supervision, the most historically significant artifacts had been documented, with some traveling to Washington, while others remained in the local museum. The Vasquez Journal will be the centerpiece of our new Spanish colonial exhibition, Harrington explained proudly, with proper attribution to you as the discoverer. Of course. Whitehawk and other tribal elders arrived, bringing additional Apache families. Relations between the settlement and Copper Springs had improved markedly, partly due to Foundation initiatives providing educational opportunities for children of all backgrounds. Inside the museum, guests admired the carefully curated displays. Thomas had insisted on accurate historical context, presenting the complicated truth. Spanish colonial wealth often came at the expense of indigenous peoples, yet the treasures themselves told a story of cultural intersection and shared history. Your wife would be proud, Eleanor said softly, joining Thomas as he watched Sarah explain an exhibit to younger children. Thomas smiled. His relationship with Eleanor had deepened over the months, moving gradually from friendship toward something more. Sarah had noticed, of course, and approved in her straightforward way. Papa, Miss Eleanor makes you smile like in the photograph with Mama. As the formal ceremonies concluded and guests enjoyed refreshments on the grounds, Sarah tugged Thomas toward the old cabin. I want to show you something, she said with mysterious importance. Behind the restored structure, near where they had first discovered the treasure, Sarah led him to a small juniper shrub. Carefully, she brushed aside soil at its base, revealing something small and turquoise-colored. I found it yesterday, she explained, lifting a pendant identical to the one Maria had worn, the one Thomas had described to Sarah countless times, but had been sold years ago for food money. Thomas stared in disbelief. Where did this come from? It was just there, waiting to be found, Sarah said simply. Like the treasure was waiting. Don't you see, Papa? Mama guided us here. She's still watching over us. Thomas held the pendant, emotion tightening his throat. Logically, it was impossible. Maria's pendant had been sold in a town 100 miles away. Yet here was its twin, unearthed, where their journey began. Some mysteries, Thomas reflected, weren't meant to be solved through evidence and reason. Some required faith and acceptance of the inexplicable. That evening, after the guests departed, Thomas, Sarah, and Eleanor walked to the small cemetery where they had relocated Maria's remains months earlier. Sarah placed wildflowers on the grave, while Thomas carefully hung the turquoise pendant on the simple wooden cross. Thank you, he whispered. Whether to Maria's spirit or to the greater forces that had guided their path, he wasn't entirely sure. As sunset painted the desert in gold reminiscent of the treasure that had changed their lives, Thomas reflected on their journey. From poverty and prejudice to respect and influence, from mere survival to creating a legacy that would benefit generations. The true treasure, he realized, hadn't been the gold or artifact. It had been the opportunity to transform not just their own lives, but the lives of others, to heal historical wounds rather than perpetuate them, to build bridges between cultures that had too long been separated by mistrust. Sarah slipped her hand into his. What happens next, Papa? Thomas smiled, squeezing her small fingers. We write our own story now, little one. Eleanor joined them, her presence warm and supportive. Together they watched the last light fade from the desert sky, standing at the threshold between the story that had brought them here and the one they would create together. Behind them, the turquoise pendant caught the day's final ray of sunshine, glinting like a promise kept, like a blessing bestowed, like a journey completed, and another just beginning.